start spreading the news. I'm leaving today. I want to be part of it. New York, New York.
420,000 New Yorkers moved out of the city between March 1st and May 1st. Between May and July, there was a 95% year-on-year increase in people expressing interest in moving out of Manhattan. And according to Governor Andrew Cuomo, it looks like most who fled from COVID aren't coming back.
I am also witnessing many of my friends leaving. These are basically upper middle class and wealthy people. They're the tax base of the city.
Given that the wealthy 1% pay half of the state's taxes, that leaves a huge financial black hole. It's starting to look like the dark days of the 1970s are on their way back.
Once considered the safest big city in America, crime is now rising dramatically.
All our friends are moving out as well.
We're also really missing the city that we had, and that's not the city that it is at the moment.
Perhaps the most draconian coronavirus lockdown in America is a major factor for the exodus. But it's not the only one. Why is the Big Apple going rotten? Well, prepare to be shocked, because it turns out that emptying all the prisons of criminals leads to an increase in crime. I know, I couldn't believe it either, but it's true. Citing the threat of COVID-19, Mayor de Blasio set free 2,000 prisoners. 50 of the first 1,500 to be released were quickly rearrested. One of those was a rapist who tried to rape again. Another was a convicted murderer who tried to rob a bank. Citing the fact that there's plenty of space in New York's jails for social distancing, the New York Post editorial board even accused de Blasio of, quote, letting folks out for ideological reasons and public safety be damned. In the same week that shootings surged 277%, de Blasio had the nerve to get on television and celebrate New York's record low prison population.
We now have fewer people in our jails than any time since World War II. And we are safer for it.
Safer for it? Is that some kind of sick joke?
People said that if we reduced incarceration and ended the era of mass incarceration, we would be endangered. It was the other way around.
No, it wasn't. Compared to the same month last year, overall shootings for July have spiked 177%. Murders are up 59%. Burglaries are up 31%. Between Thursday and Saturday last week, 49 people were shot in a 48-hour period. That's 5 times more than the same period last year. That rivals Chicago levels.
President Trump is hinting at a possible federal intervention after another surge in shootings across New York City.
A 7-year-old girl was wounded and a 19-year-old woman was murdered.
And we are safer for it.
There have been 1,087 shooting victims so far in 2020. That's compared to 577 for the same period last year.
A 40-year-old man was shot while waiting for his train on the platform at Grand Central Terminal. Cops released this video of the suspected gunman. 50 shootings in the past 48 hours, with gun violence in New York continuing to rage on with no end in sight.
And we are safer for it.
On Tuesday night, 9 more people were shot in 5 separate incidents across Queens, Brooklyn and Manhattan in a matter of hours.
And we are safer for it.
Residents are panic buying bulletproof vests. Midtown dealer Brad Padell says sales of body armor are up 80%. He told the New York Post, quote, you wouldn't believe the people who call up and say, I'm scared. And how did Governor Cuomo react to all this? By blaming the police.
Denial is not a successful life strategy.
By blaming the same NYPD that he and de Blasio have trashed, undermined, stripped of power and defunded.
You cannot dismiss these numbers. Over 90% of the victims are black and brown.
Yeah, I wonder why 90% of the victims are black and brown. Could it possibly be because they're all shooting each other? Could it possibly be because your mate de Blasio let them all out of jail?
And we are safer for it.
And none of this is confined to the poorer areas. When compared to the same period last year, Manhattan's Upper East Side has seen a 286% increase in robberies. And those thinking they can escape all this by fleeing to the Upper West Side, well, they can think again. That's become a dumping ground for hundreds of homeless people who the city has put up in luxury hotels in an attempt to keep shelters clear of COVID-19. 139 of the city's iconic hotels have been turned over to help house these most unwelcome neighbours. The city and FEMA is paying $175 per day per person.
In Times Square, seemingly homeless people are sprawled out where pedestrians would typically walk and gather. She recently took these pictures of a needle and what appears to be a bag of heroin.
There are people defecating on the streets. There are people selling drugs on the streets. There are people using telephone booths as their office. I mean, it's incredible what's going on.
Now, it would be snobbish and condescending for the wealthy to assume that they could live in a major city without witnessing homelessness.
Why don't you get a job?
But the city got caught housing registered sex offenders just a block away from a children's playground. Residents say they're living in fear of homeless people being aggressively intimidating, spitting at them, verbally abusing them, doing drugs, masturbating in the open, and urinating on the street.
They'll start self-pleasurizing themselves. They'll pass out on the street from K2, smoking crack, shooting heroin.
People are being assaulted every day, fights every day. It's a cesspool for drugs, a cesspool for violence, a cesspool for garbage. It's disgusting.
But there's still a deluge of delusional progressive morons who think that by writing the word love on the ground in chalk outside these hotels, that will somehow offset the masturbating, the pissing, the spitting, the shooting, and all the aggressive intimidation. Local restaurants are going out of business because customers aren't allowed to sit inside, and they don't want to sit outside because they're getting harassed for money by the homeless.
There's anger and disbelief that with cold weather around the corner and restaurants struggling, Mayor de Blasio has no plans to allow indoor dining in New York City.
I'm petrified. So the cops are not responding now at all. You call 911 and say, oh, you want to defund us? Okay, now you'll see what it's like without cops.
Maybe the police would have more manpower and resources to deal with this. If, for example, de Blasio didn't devote 27 of them to guard a Black Lives Matter mural outside Trump Tower. A sizable work crew, including de Blasio himself, were allowed to violate permit rules and gather in close proximity to paint the mural. Yet the 9/11 Light Beam Memorial Tribute has been cancelled for the first time in 18 years because of the threat posed by coronavirus to the work crew. Once again, so long as your message is ardently anti-police, anti-American and pro-BLM, apparently COVID suddenly mutates into a woke virus and takes a vacation. The message is patently ludicrous. Oh, you can't get corona at a BLM rally attended by tens of thousands of people, but if you visit a light show, you're killing Granny. And remember, these are the same health officials who at the start of the pandemic told people to go out and congregate in huge crowds. Commissioner Dave H. Oxy told New Yorkers to ignore, quote, misinformation about corona and to go out and mingle with thousands of others to celebrate Chinese Lunar New Year. Mark D. Levine praised crowds for defying coronavirus by gathering in huge numbers. And as late as March, de Blasio himself was broadcasting the same message. Cuomo also forced nursing homes to take in COVID-infected patients, leading to over 10,000 deaths. So it's pretty rich of the same people who did all that to be lecturing us about COVID now.
And we are safer for it.
Denial is not a successful life strategy.
New York City's crime wave has also been exacerbated by violent Black Lives Matter protests. And yet Mayor de Blasio has caved to BLM at every available opportunity. Despite criminals becoming more emboldened and violence spiraling out of control, de Blasio submitted to Black Lives Matter demand to defund the police, stripping $1 billion from the city's police budget and disbanding the plainclothes anti-crime unit. Hundreds of officers furious at the move have submitted their retirement papers in recent weeks. Others say they've been abandoned, stripped of their powers to tackle violent criminals and pursue suspects. That's why the NYPD's largest union, the Sergeants Benevolent Association, has openly endorsed Trump. New York also stinks. Quite literally stinks. A $106 million sanitation COVID budget cut, which reduced garbage pickup by 60%, has left huge piles of uncollected trash, including used masks, lying around the city. Street cleanings have been reduced by half. Raccoons and rats are taking over.
These two raccoons feasting on an overflowing bin the other night outside a Hamilton Heights playground.
Oh my God, look at them all.
Dirty, stinking rats. Dozens of them swarming around trash cans. Living in New York, you do see rats from time to time, but man, it never looks like this.
Money from tourists has also dried up too. Anyone entering New York, even from within the United States, faces a mandatory 14-day COVID quarantine, a de facto house arrest. Checkpoints have been set up all around the city to catch COVID quarantine flouters, who are then hit with massive fines if they're caught outdoors. So why even visit? Most of the attractions are shut down, and even if you do get there, you're treated like a leper. JCPenney and Neiman Marcus have both filed for bankruptcy. The Subway food chain has closed dozens of its locations in New York City in recent months. Le Pain Quotidien has also been forced to close several stores, saying there's just nowhere near enough people on the streets. According to reality TV star Jonathan Cheban, who was recently robbed at gunpoint, it's now traumatic to be in New York. Cheban, another celebrity who is desperately trying to sell his apartment and leave, accuses Mayor de Blasio of destroying the city. Big Apple born and bred entrepreneur James Altucher also fled the city after the riots in June. Altucher says New York is, quote, completely dead and it's not coming back. Broadway is closed until at least the spring. The Lincoln Center is closed. All the museums have closed, said Altucher, adding that his 3 favorite restaurants are all also closed. And he makes the point that unlike after the 2008 crash, fast broadband is now almost ubiquitous. When most middle-class and wealthy people can work remotely, what's the point in staying in a crime-ridden big city? And that's why New York property prices are beginning to plummet.
This year, we are seeing record declines. The number of new leases falling 23% over last year. Median rents with the largest decline in history. But what is most troubling right now for this market is the number of empty apartments. There are now over 13,000 apartments in Manhattan that are up for rent. That is an all-time high and more than double last year's total.
There's a glut of supply because of COVID and people trying to flee, but no real demand. Look at this video of Fifth Avenue. Boarded up shops near deserted streets. Far from its reputation as one of the most elegant and prosperous thoroughfares in the world, it's now said to resemble a demilitarized zone. It now looks like something closer to the city portrayed in the dystopian movie Escape from New York, which is kind of ironic because that's precisely what everyone's doing.
In 1988, the crime rate in the United States rises 400%. The once great city of New York becomes the one maximum security prison for the entire country. The rules are simple. Once you go in, you don't come out.
It feels like the 1970s, one local community board member told the New York Post. Everyone who can move out is moving out. Governor Cuomo pleaded with New Yorkers who have left the city to come back. He even promised to cook them dinner.
You gotta come back. When are you coming back? We'll go to dinner. I'll buy you a drink. Come over, I'll cook.
Come back to what? A crime-ridden, trash-strewn, decaying, violent, lawless, leftist shithole.
You gotta come back.
Yeah, I don't think the prospect of a Manhattan clam chowder or a thin-crust pizza is going to be much of a temptation. Thanks to the destitution of the 1970s, New York was once known as Fear City. Thanks to Cuomo, de Blasio, and the rest of the progressive mob running New York into the ground in 2020. And in the absence of a Rudy Giuliani to clean the place up, those same fears are now making a rapacious comeback.
The mayor of New York City, he's killing the city, and he's an idiot.
Olá pessoal, tudo bem? Aqui é o Tradutor. Eu tô passando para te avisar que eu tô numa campanha para conseguir pelo menos mais 9 apoiadores até o final do ano. Esse canal não é monetizado, então totalmente depende de você. Eu preciso muito do seu apoio para manter esse canal atualizado e vivo, né, no ar. Os links para apoiar esse nosso projeto estão na descrição desse vídeo e no comentário fixado. Então é muito fácil e muito simples de apoiar. É graças a essas pessoas incríveis que eu posso estar trazendo conteúdo para vocês. E é isso aí, pessoal. Não se esqueçam de deixar seu like, seu comentário e até mais. Fui! Grande abraço.